Hello, and welcome to Mythos and Logos. There is an island that has never appeared on any map, yet every soul who has ever dreamed knows exactly where to find it. For 1500 years, wounded kings have sailed there to be healed, enchantresses have ruled from towers that pierce the mist, and apple trees have bloomed in eternal autumn, their fruit promising immortality to those who dare to taste. The island exists. The island has never existed. Both statements are absolutely true. Tonight, we will journey to Avalon, that shimmering threshold between the world of matter and the world of spirit, between history and myth, between death and eternal life. We'll walk through orchards, where golden apples grow heavier with meaning than with juice, stand at the shores where barges arrive carrying broken heroes, and climb the spiral paths where Christian hermits built their cells atop the sacred sites of far older gods. We'll trace how a name first whispered in medieval Latin became the most powerful symbol of otherworldly refuge in the Western imagination, and discover why, even now, thousands of pilgrims journey each year to a small town in Somerset, convinced they can still catch glimpses of the eternal isle through the morning mist. May I ask for your help? Liking and subscribing takes just a moment, but makes a huge difference for the channel. I'm grateful for your consideration. I'm also always amazed by our international reach, so I'd appreciate hearing where you're joining from and your local time. As the present fades to whispers, we find ourselves transported to a Britain where the last Roman legions have long since marched away, where Saxon war bands push ever westward, and where the old Celtic magic retreats like the tide to hidden places, pooling in sacred groves, in springs that bubble up from the earth's deep heart, and most of all, on islands surrounded by water and mist, those natural boundaries between the solid world and something far more fluid, far more strange, where waters meet the other world. To understand Avalon, we must first understand the Celtic soul's relationship with water and with islands. Water, in the Celtic imagination, was never simply H2O, never merely the stuff that filled rivers and lakes and surrounded their lands on three sides. Water was the medium through which one passed between worlds. It was conscious, alive, inhabited by beings of immense power and uncertain temperament. Every spring had its guardian spirit, every lake its resident deity, every river its own personality and demands. Islands held particular power in this cosmology. They were paradoxes made manifest in the physical world. Their earth that was not quite earth, surrounded by water that was not quite water. They existed in the liminal space, the threshold, the place between. In Irish tradition, there was Tir na Nog, the land of the young, where the Tuatha De Danann retreated when the world of men became too coarse for their refined magic. There was Mag Mell, the plain of delight, and Tir na Mbeo, the land of the living, where death was unknown and sorrow unnamed. In Welsh tradition, which would birth Avalon most directly, there was the otherworld of Andon, sometimes described as an island, sometimes as an underground realm, but always as a place where the normal rules of mortality and physics held no sway. The Welsh word Innis means island, but in the old tales, it carried implications far beyond mere geography. An Innis was a place set apart, a realm unto itself, governed by its own laws and logic. The firmness of the ground beneath your feet on an Minis was always questionable. At any moment, what seemed solid might dissolve back into mist and memory. Time flowed differently on these islands. A visitor might spend what seemed like 3 days feasting in a magnificent hall, only to return to the mainland to discover that 3 centuries had passed, and everyone they had known had long since crumbled to dust. These islands were not discovered through navigation or exploration. They revealed themselves, or they didn't. They appeared to those who needed to find them, or to those whom the islands themselves had chosen. Sailors might pass the same stretch of water 1,000 times and see nothing but waves. Then on the 1,001st passage, Usually when the mist was thick and their need was great, an island would materialize from the grey uncertainty, its shores lined with apple trees in perpetual bloom. The apples themselves deserve our attention. In Celtic mythology, apples were never ordinary fruit. They were the food of the gods, the sustainers of immortality, the symbols of sovereignty and sacred kingship. In the Irish tale of The Voyage of Borne, the hero is summoned to the otherworld by a woman bearing a silver branch laden with white apple blossoms. The sound of this branch was so sweet that it could banish all sorrow and pain from those who heard it. When Bran finally reached the otherworldly island, he found it filled with apple trees, whose fruit satisfied every hunger, physical, emotional, and spiritual. The Welsh had their own apple traditions. In the medieval Welsh poem Avalon, the apple trees, attributed to the prophet madman Merlin, whom we know better by his Latinized name, Merlin, the apple trees are repositories of arcane wisdom and prophetic power. Merlin, driven mad by grief and guilt after a terrible battle, flees to the forest where he lives, among the apple trees, which speak to him of past and future, of the rise and fall of kingdoms, of the thin places where the otherworld presses close against our own. This, then, was the mythological substrate into which Avalon would plant its roots, a tradition of sacred islands that existed outside normal space and time, accessible only to the chosen or the desperate, ruled by different laws than those that governed the mortal world, and always associated with apple trees, whose fruit offered more than mere nourishment. These elements were already ancient when the Romans came to Britain, already layered with centuries of meaning and reverence. They waited in the collective imagination, like seeds in winter soil, ready to bloom into something new when the right storyteller came along. The first whispers, "You stand at the prow of a small boat, and the world you know is dissolving. The mist has risen so thick that you cannot see the water beneath you, cannot tell where the sea ends and the air begins. Your hands grip worn wood, smooth from countless journeys, though you sense this particular voyage has never been made before, will never be made again, is always being made. The sound reaches you first, not quite music, not quite voices, but something that partakes of both. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, rising from the water itself, descending from the invisible sky, emanating from the mist that pearls your skin with moisture, that feels almost warm, almost alive. You breathe, and the air tastes of apples, though you can see no trees. Not yet. The boat moves without oars, without sail. You are not steering, yet you know you are going exactly where you need to go. Time has become elastic, meaningless. Have you been travelling for moments or months? Your old life seems both immediate and impossibly distant, like something you dreamed once and can only partially recall. The mist is inside you now, clouding the sharp edges of memory, softening the boundaries of self. Then the first apple branch appears, extending from the grey, nothing like a hand offered in greeting. The blossoms are white as sea foam, white as bone, white as the spaces between words in an unwritten story. As your boat passes beneath it, a single petal falls, spiralling down with impossible slowness. It touches the back of your hand, and for an instant, you understand everything, the pattern behind all patterns, the song that sang the world into being, the secret name of every star. Then, the knowledge fades, leaving only a faint warmth on your skin and a certainty that you are approaching something magnificent and terrible and absolutely necessary. More trees emerge from the mist, their branches heavy with fruit that seems to glow with its own soft light. The apples are golden, silver, red as heart's blood, colours that have no names in the language you spoke before you stepped into this boat. Each tree you pass whispers something different. One speaks of heroes yet to be born, another of loves that transcended death, a third of the moment when the last magic will fade from the world. You realise you could reach out and pluck an apple, could taste immortality, could step out of the stream of time and into an eternal autumn afternoon. The temptation is almost overwhelming, but the boat carries you onward, and now you see the shore. Geoffrey's great invention. In the year 1136, in the scriptorium of Oxford, a Welsh cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth set down his quill after completing a passage that would echo through the centuries. In his Historia Regum Britanniae, the history of the kings of Britain, he had just given a name to something that had floated nameless through Celtic tradition for generations. Insula Avalonis, he wrote, the Isle of Apples, Avalon. Geoffrey was not, despite his title's claim, writing history as we understand it. He was weaving together threads of Welsh oral tradition, fragments of earlier chronicles, imaginative elaborations, and pure invention to create what he claimed was a comprehensive account of British rulers, from the legendary Brutus of Troy through to the Saxon invasions. His work was propaganda as much as chronicle, aimed at giving the Norman conquerors of Britain a sense of the ancient nobility of the land they now ruled, while simultaneously preserving Welsh traditions that were in danger of being forgotten. In Geoffrey's telling, Avalon appears at the climactic moment of his narrative. Arthur, the greatest of all British kings, has fought his last battle against the traitor Mordred at Camlan. Both the traitor and the king have dealt each other mortal wounds. But while Mordred dies on the field, Arthur is carried away to the Isle of Apples, ad sananda vulnera sua, so that his wounds might be healed. Geoffrey tells us nothing more about this island in the Historia, leaving it shrouded in tantalizing mystery. But 14 years later, around 1150, Geoffrey returned to Avalon in his Vita Merlini, the Life of Merlin. Here, he expanded on his earlier hints, painting a picture of an earthly paradise that drew from classical sources like Isidore of Seville's descriptions of the Fortunate Isles, while remaining deeply rooted in Celtic Otherworld traditions. The island, he tells us, is also called Fortunata, the Fortunate Isle, because all things grow there of their own accord. The fields need no farmers, the vines need no tending. Grain and grapes grow wild in abundance. The apple trees, those markers of Celtic otherness, produce fruit from their own natural vigour. Men live for 100 years or more. Most significantly, Geoffrey introduces the figure who would become Avalon's most famous resident, Morgan. Note the name carefully, Morgan, not yet the Morgan Le Fay of later romance. In Geoffrey's account, she is the first among 9 sisters who rule the island. She is beautiful beyond description, learned in the healing arts, capable of shape-shifting and flight. She knows the properties of all herbs, can cure all ailments. It is to her that Arthur is brought after Camlan, and she receives him gladly, promising that he can be healed if he remains on the island long enough. Geoffrey's Morgan bears little resemblance to the scheming sorceress of later Arthurian tradition. She is closer to the Irish goddess Morrigan, or the Welsh Modron, divine figures associated with sovereignty, healing, and the threshold between life and death. The 9 sisters recall the 9 maidens who in Welsh tradition kindle the fire beneath the cauldron of rebirth, that vessel which could restore the dead to life, though they would return mute, unable to speak of what they had seen beyond the veil. The healing isle, the barge appears through the mist, just as the last light fades from the battlefield. Arthur lies among the dead and dying, his breath shallow, blood seeping through the gaps in his armour, from wounds that would have killed a lesser man hours ago. Bedivere, faithful to the end, has already thrown Excalibur back to the lake, has seen the hand rise from the water to catch it, pulling it down to depths that have no bottom. Now come the queens, though whether they are 3 or 4, the stories cannot agree. They move like mist given form, their robes the colour of deep water, their faces beautiful and terrible with grief. One is Morgan, his sister, his enemy, his saviour, all these things at once, all these contradictions held in perfect balance. Her hands, which once wove enchantments against him, now gentle as they lift his broken body. Another might be the Queen of Northgales, another the Lady of the Lake herself, though their faces shift and change in the dying light, and perhaps they are all aspects of the same divine feminine principle, the sovereignty of the land itself, come to reclaim its chosen king. They place him in the barge with infinite care. Morgan cradles his head in her lap, and her tears fall on his face like rain. She speaks, but her words are in the old tongue, the language spoken before the Romans came, before iron replaced bronze, when the bond between king and land was sealed in blood and maintained through sacrifice. The barge needs no oarsman. It moves of its own accord, drawn by currents that exist beneath the surface of the visible world. As they sail, Arthur drifts between consciousness and something deeper than sleep. He sees his life spreading out beneath him, like a map, every battle, every decision, every moment of glory and failure. He sees Guinevere in their wedding bower, young and radiant with hope. He sees Lancelot, that paragon of knighthood, whose love destroyed, even as it ennobled. He sees the Round Table in its glory, when the seats were full and the dream of perfect justice seemed within reach. He sees it all ending in blood at Camelon, brother fighting brother, the ideal of Camelot drowning in human frailty. The journey to Avalon takes no time. The journey to Avalon takes forever. When the mist finally parts, the island reveals itself in the strange light that is neither dawn nor dusk, but something outside the normal progression of hours. The apple trees are in simultaneous bud, bloom, and fruit, their branches heavy with impossible abundance. The air itself seems to have substance, thickness, a golden quality that makes everything appear to be viewed through honey or amber. Morgan and her sisters carry Arthur to a pavilion made of silk, the colour of spring leaves. They lay him on a bed softer than clouds, and Morgan begins her work. She does not simply bind wounds or apply poultices. Her healing goes deeper, to the essence of what Arthur is and was and might yet be. She sings the damage from his bones, draws the poison from his blood, rebuilds him from the inside out. But some wounds go deeper than flesh, deeper than bone, down to the soul itself. The wound dealt by Mordred, his son, his doom, his dark mirror. This wound resists even Morgan's power. He can be healed, she says to the sisters, to the island, to the waiting world beyond the mist. But not quickly, not easily. He must remain here, in this place outside time, while the slow work of restoration continues. And so Arthur remains, neither dead nor truly alive, suspended in Avalon's eternal afternoon, waiting for the moment when Britain's need will be great enough to call him back, when the wound will finally close, when the once and future king will return. 9 sisters in the mist. They move through Avalon's eternal twilight, like notes in an ancient song, each distinct yet part of a greater harmony. Morgan leads them, but to say she rules would be to misunderstand the nature of power on the Apple Isle. Here, authority flows like water, pooling where it is needed, never hoarded, never grasped. Morano, the second sister, knows the secret names of every herb that has ever grown or ever will grow. When she walks through Avalon's meadows, the plants lean toward her, like children toward their mother. She speaks to them in whispers, and they reveal their properties, this one to cure melancholy, that one to grant true sight, another to ease the passage between life and death. Mazoe and Gleaton, the third and fourth, are shapeshifters of surpassing skill. They become owl and otter, wind and water, taking forms as easily as others might change garments. Sometimes they appear as crones at the shore, testing visitors with riddles. Sometimes they are maidens in the apple groves, singing songs that make the fruit ripen faster. Glitania and Gliton, whose names echo each other like rhymes, are masters of music and mathematics, which on Avalon are understood to be the same art expressed in different media. They can sing stones into perfect circles, calculate the exact note that will shatter a warrior's courage or mend a broken heart. Tyranno reads the flight of birds. Like others read books, finding in their patterns the shapes of things to come. Every morning she stands at Avalon's highest point, watching the herons and hawks, the swans and sparrows, translating their movements into prophecy. Thetis plays the lyre with such skill that the dead pause in their journey to the other world to listen. Her music can call souls back to bodies they have abandoned, though whether this is kindness or cruelty, none can say. Apples of immortality. In Avalon's orchards, it is always harvest time and always spring's first flowering. The trees exist in every season simultaneously, bearing bud and blossom and fruit on the same branch, in defiance of every natural law. The apples themselves are things of wonder, each one unique, each one perfect, each one containing within its flesh a different aspect of eternity. Some shine like gold in sunlight, warm to the touch, pulsing with their own inner light. These are the apples of physical immortality, the ones that repair damaged cells, that turn back the clock of aging, that make the body incorruptible as metal. One bite, the stories say, adds 100 years to a mortal life. 2 bites, 1,000. A whole apple, and death loses your name forever. Others are silver as moonlight, cool as autumn mist. These are the apples of memory and forgetting, each one containing within it the power to restore what was lost, or to wash clean the slate of recollection. Warriors who have seen too much horror eat them to forget. Lovers separated by death eat them to remember every moment of joy they shared. The red apples, dark as heart's blood, as garnets, as the last light before night falls completely, these are the most dangerous. They grant knowledge, not the small knowledge of facts and figures, but the terrible, magnificent knowledge of how all things connect, of the pattern behind reality's veil. Most mortals who taste them go mad from the revelation. The few who maintain their sanity are never quite human again. The trees themselves seem conscious, aware. They lean their branches towards certain visitors, offering their fruit freely. From others, they withhold, raising their boughs high, letting their apples fall to the grass, only to vanish before they can be gathered. The orchard has its own will, its own purpose, and that purpose is not always aligned with the desires of those who seek its treasures. Between the trees, the grass is soft as silk, studded with flowers that exist nowhere else. Blooms that chime like bells when the wind touches them, others that glow with phosphorescent light when night falls. Though night on Avalon is never truly dark, only a deepening of the golden twilight that eternally embraces the island. The sovereignty of Morgan. Morgan sits at the heart of Avalon, like a spider at the centre of a web, made not of silk, but of story, destiny, and power. She has been many things to many traditions. Goddess, queen, healer, destroyer, Arthur's sister, Arthur's lover, Arthur's salvation, Arthur's doom. On Avalon, she is all these things, and none of them. She simply is, in the way that mountains are, that oceans are, that the turning of the seasons is. Her origins reach back far beyond Geoffrey's Latin chronicles, into the mists of Celtic mythology, where she was Morrigan, the Great Queen, the Phantom Queen, the goddess of war and fate and sovereignty. In Ireland, she was triple, Bad, Matcha, and Nemain Crow goddess, who chose who would die in battle, who could appear as young maiden, mature woman, or ancient crone. She was the sovereignty of the land itself, the power that kings must wed to rule legitimately, the force that could make or unmake kingdoms with a word. When the stories travelled to Wales, she became Modron, the Great Mother, derived from the Gaulish goddess Matrona. She was the mother of Mabon, the divine child who was stolen from her when 3 nights old, imprisoned until the end of time, yet who would return as liberator? The themes are already there. Loss and return, death and healing, the eternal cycle of departure and homecoming that would define Avalon itself. In Avalon, Morgan has transcended all these earlier forms while containing them all. She is sister and mother, virgin and crone, healer and harbinger of doom. She rules not through force, but through understanding. She knows the true names of all things, the words that spoke creation into being. She knows the price of every action, the weight of every choice, the threads that connect all living things in an infinite web of cause and consequence. Her hall at the centre of the island is built from materials that exist nowhere else. Stones that sing harmonies too subtle for human ears, wood from trees that grew before the division of light and darkness, glass made from sand, gathered on the shores of seas that dried up before the world was young. Here she sits at her loom, weaving not cloth but fate itself, the threads she uses drawn from the substance of possibility. Those who seek her out for healing find that her methods go far beyond the application of herbs or the chanting of spells. She heals by showing the wounded their wound's purpose, the necessity of their pain in the larger pattern. She does not ease suffering so much as transform it, transmute it from lead to gold, from ending to beginning. This is why Arthur can be healed on Avalon but cannot quickly return. His wound is not just physical but mythical, a necessary breaking that makes possible an eventual, greater wholeness. Her relationship with Arthur defines her role in the later tradition, yet never fully contains her. She is his sister, sharing his blood, understanding him as only family can. She is his enemy, working against him through much of his reign, setting tests and obstacles that force him to grow into the king he must become. She is his saviour, receiving him broken and beginning the slow work of restoration. These contradictions do not trouble her. On Avalon, contradictions are not problems to be solved but truths to be embraced. Between history and dream, the medieval mind that embraced Avalon did not draw the sharp distinctions we do between history and legend, between fact and meaning. For them, the world was enchanted, saturated with significance. Every event, both itself and a symbol of something greater. A king was both a political ruler and a sacred bridegroom of the land. A battle was both a military engagement and a cosmic struggle between order and chaos. An island could be both a physical place you might sail to and a spiritual state you might achieve. When Geoffrey of Monmouth placed Avalon into his Historia, he was not perpetrating a fraud on credulous readers. He was recognizing a different kind of truth, the truth that speaks not to the chronicling mind, but to the dreaming soul. His readers understood this instinctively. They did not ask for coordinates or sailing directions to Avalon. They understood that the island existed in the same realm as paradise, as purgatory, as the New Jerusalem, places more real than real, accessible not through physical travel, but through spiritual transformation. The medieval paradise was not the biblical Garden of Eden, though it borrowed some of its imagery. It was a place where the best of the classical and Celtic otherworlds merged with Christian eschatology to create something entirely new. It was always in the west, where the sun sets, the direction of endings that are also beginnings. It was always an island, separated from the mundane world by water that was both barrier and bridge. It was always characterized by eternal youth, abundant food that appeared without labor, and a suspension of the normal laws that govern fallen creation. The once and future king, the inscription on Arthur's tomb, whether real or imagined, carved in stone, or merely in the collective memory of Britain, reads, Hic iacet Arthurus, rex quondam, rexque futurus. Here lies Arthur, the once and future king. No other epitaph in Western literature carries such weight of promise, such defiance of death's finality. Arthur is not simply dead and awaiting resurrection like Christ, nor sleeping like Barbarossa in his mountain. He exists in a state that transcends both life and death, having passed beyond mortality's veil, while remaining tethered to the world's need for his return. The wound Mordred dealt at Camlan was more than a spear thrust through armour and flesh. It was betrayal made manifest, the corruption of the Round Table's ideal driven like a blade into the heart of everything Arthur had built. Mordred was, in most tellings, Arthur's son by his half-sister, Morgause, conceived in deception before Arthur knew their blood relationship. The son who should have been his heir became his doom. The future that should have secured Camelot's continuation became the weapon of its destruction. This is why the wound cannot heal quickly, even in Avalon's regenerative embrace. It is a wound in the fabric of meaning itself, a tear in the story that was supposed to end differently. Arthur had created something unprecedented, a kingdom based not on might alone but on justice, where knights swore to protect the innocent, defend the weak, uphold truth. The Round Table was civilization's highest achievement, a perfect circle where no seat was higher than another save for Arthur's own, where worth was measured by virtue rather than birth, where the strong voluntarily limited their strength in service to a greater good. When that ideal shattered at Camlan, when the knights of the Round Table turned their swords on each other, when loyalty fragmented into faction and fellowship dissolved into fratricide, the wound created was metaphysical. It was the wound of every ideal betrayed, every hope disappointed, every attempt at human perfection brought low by human frailty. This is what Morgan tends in her pavilion of green silk, not just torn tissue and broken bone, but the damaged dream of what humanity might achieve. The promise of return, then, is not merely about one king coming back to save his people. It is about the possibility that ideals, once shattered, might be restored, that the Round Table, though broken, might be mended, that Camelot, though fallen, might rise again. Arthur becomes every lost golden age, every vanished paradise, every moment of perfect harmony that existed briefly before discord crept in. His return is the return of possibility itself. In the centuries following Geoffrey's account, the nature of Arthur's return evolved with the needs of those who waited. During the Welsh resistance against English dominion, Arthur would return as a Celtic warrior king to drive out the Saxon invaders and their Norman successors. During the Wars of the Roses, various claimants to the throne presented themselves as Arthur reborn, come to unite a divided kingdom. During World War II, when Britain stood alone against seemingly overwhelming darkness, the legend resonated with new urgency. Perhaps this was the hour of greatest need that would summon the king from Avalon's shores. But the genius of the legend is that Arthur never quite returns, or rather, he is always returning but never fully returned. Each generation must discover its own. Arthur must build its own Round Table, must attempt its own Camelot. The once and future king reigns not in person, but in potential, and Avalon holds him in trust, not for a single apocalyptic return, but for every moment when humanity reaches toward its better angels. The mechanics of his healing remain deliberately vague in the stories. Morgan applies no simple bandages, brews no ordinary potions. Some versions suggest she feeds him the apples of immortality, one golden slice at a time, each piece restoring a fragment of his dissipated strength. Others claim she sings over him continuously, weaving songs that rebuild his body note by note, creating new flesh from melody, new bone from harmony. Still others insist that his healing requires him to forget to release his attachment to the world of men, to let go of Guinevere and Lancelot and the weight of kingship, to become something other than Arthur, before he can become Arthur again. Time moves differently around his healing bed. Centuries pass in Britain, while perhaps only days drift by in Avalon. Or perhaps it is the reverse. Perhaps Morgan has been tending him for eons, while mere generations have aged and died in the world beyond the mist. The temporal distortion serves a purpose. It allows Arthur to be both historical figure, fixed in the 6th century, and eternal principle, available to every era that needs him. Excalibur's return. Before the barge can come, before the queens can carry him away, there is the matter of the sword. Excalibur cannot go to Avalon. It belongs to the lake, to the lady who gave it, to the depths that existed before land rose from the waters, and will remain when land sinks beneath them again. Bedivere, last of the faithful, last night standing at the field of Camlan, receives the hardest order of his life: throw the sword back. Twice he fails. The sword is too beautiful, too precious, too much the symbol of everything they fought to build. Its blade has never been notched in all the battles it has seen, its edge never dulled. The grip fits his hand as if made for it, though it was made for no mortal hand at all. When he holds it, he can feel its power thrumming through the metal, a vibration that goes deeper than sound, older than words. How can he throw away such perfection? When Arthur is gone, when the round table is scattered, when Camelot itself will soon be nothing but ruins, shouldn't something remain? Shouldn't there be proof that the dream was real? He tells Arthur he has done it, describes the nothing that happened when nothing hit the water. Arthur, even dying, knows the lie. What did you see? He asks, and Bedivere's invented nothing reveals his disobedience. Again he is sent, again he fails, again he lies, again he is caught. It is only on the third attempt, and 3 is always the number of transformation, of completion, of moving from one state to another, that Bedivere finds the strength to truly let go. The sword arcs through the air, turning end over end, catching the last light of the dying day on its blade. For a moment it seems to hang suspended, as if time itself has paused to honour this ending. Then from the lake rises a hand, clothed in white samite, mystic, wonderful. It catches Excalibur by the grip, holds it aloft 3 times in salute or farewell or promise, then draws it down beneath the surface, which closes without a ripple, as if the sword had never been, as if the hand had never risen, as if the whole age of wonders was sinking with that blade into depths beyond recovery. The lake that receives Excalibur is not water as we understand it. It is the primordial deep, the waters that existed before creation, the unconscious from which all symbols arise, and to which they return. The Lady of the Lake, she who gave the sword to Arthur through Merlin's arrangement, is sovereignty itself, the power that makes kings legitimate. She gave Arthur the right to rule, the cutting edge of justice, the point of decision. Now she takes it back, not in anger, but in completion. The loan is repaid, the contract fulfilled. The king can go to his healing. Some versions of the story create a profound connection between the lake and Avalon. They are the same place seen from different angles, or Avalon sits beneath the lake's waters, or the lake is the only route to the island. The Lady of the Lake and Morgan are sisters, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively, both expressions of the divine feminine that governs the mysteries of water, blood, and transformation. When Excalibur returns to the lake, it returns to the same power that will heal Arthur on Avalon. The sword must go home so the king can go home. The symbol of his earthly authority must be surrendered so his mythic authority can be restored. Thomas Mallory's synthesis. You are in a stone cell in Newgate Prison in the year 1469, and your hands are stained with ink that will never quite wash clean. You are Sir Thomas Mallory, knight, prisoner, and now the weaver of the greatest English prose romance ever written. Around you, England tears itself apart in the Wars of the Roses, brother fighting brother for the throne, the ideals of chivalry drowning in political expedients. You write by candlelight that makes the shadows dance across your pages, and in those shadows you see Camelot falling, Arthur dying, the round table splintering into factions that mirror the world outside your prison walls. You have spent years gathering every version of the Arthur story. You can find French romances, English poems, Welsh traditions, each with its own version of how the great matter of Britain should be told. Now you synthesize them all, creating from the chaos of competing narratives a single, magnificent tragedy. Your Immortality Arthur will become the definitive version, the one that shapes all future tellings, and at its heart lies Avalon, more mysterious and powerful in your telling than ever before. When you write of Arthur's passing, your quill trembles slightly, and many men say that there is written upon his tomb this verse, Hic iasset Arthurus, Rex quondam, Rexque futurus. You pause, then add your own thoughts, careful, equivocal, leaving room for both faith and doubt. Yet some men say in many parts of England that King Arthur is not dead, but had by the will of our Lord Jesus into another place. And men say that he shall come again, and he shall win the Holy Cross. Your Avalon is deliberately vague, a place that exists more in the yearning for it than in any geographical specificity. You call it sometimes Avalon, sometimes the Vale of Avalon, suggesting both island and valley, both separation from and connection to the ordinary world. This ambiguity is purposeful. You understand that Avalon's power lies not in its precise location, but in its permanent possibility, its existence just beyond the edge of the mappable world. You give Morgan more complexity than any writer before you. She is Arthur's half-sister, trained in necromancy, often his enemy throughout his reign. She steals Excalibur's scabbard, which protects its wearer from losing blood. She sends the Green Knight to test the Round Table's virtue. She reveals Guinevere's affair with Lancelot. Yet when Arthur lies dying, she is one of the queens who comes to bear him away, weeping for the brother she fought so hard to destroy. This paradox does not trouble you. You understand that love and hate can coexist, that the same person can be both destroyer and healer, that sometimes we must break what we love to save it. The barge of queens, they come across water, smooth as black glass, and their barge makes no sound as it approaches the blood-soaked shore. The dying light of Camlan's last day turns everything the colour of old wine, of garnets, of promises broken, and honour betrayed. The queens wear robes that seem to be cut from the twilight itself, neither black nor purple, but something between, something that has no name in the vocabulary of daylight. Morgan leads them, and her beauty is terrible to behold, not the beauty of youth or desire, but the beauty of necessity, of winter, of the endings that make beginnings possible. Her face shows no trace of the battles she and Arthur fought through proxies and magic and manipulation. There is only grief now, vast and deep as the lake itself, grief for the brother, the king, the dream that lies broken on this field, where the last knights of the Round Table water the grass with their blood. Beside her stands a queen, whose face shifts depending on the angle of viewing, now young, now old, now neither, now both. Some say she is the Queen of Northgales, others the Queen of the Wastelands. Perhaps she is both. Perhaps she is all queens who have ever wept over fallen kings, all sisters who have cradled broken brothers, all women who have watched the men they loved destroy themselves in pursuit of glory or honour, or some ideal that seemed worth more than life until life was ending. The third queen might be Nimue, the Lady of the Lake herself, she who gave Excalibur, and now has received it back. Her tears are like rain on still water, each one creating ripples that spread in perfect circles before disappearing into the general grief. She says nothing, has perhaps never said anything that was not spoken through symbol and sign, but her presence sanctifies this moment of transition. What happens here is not just a king being carried to healing, but a mystery being enacted, a ritual as old as the first warrior who fell defending his people and was mourned by those he died to protect. The fourth queen, when there is a fourth, remains unnamed, unknowable. She stands at the edge of vision, at the periphery of story, representing perhaps all the untold griefs, the unrecorded losses, the forgotten names of those who died at Camlan and had no queens to bear them away, no magical islands to heal them, no prophecies of return. She is the democracy of death, the equality of grief, the reminder that every fallen soldier was someone's Arthur. Where magic never died, Avalon exists as refuge, as reservation, as the last preserve where the old ways maintain their power undiminished. When Christianity spread across Britain, transforming sacred groves into churchyards, holy wells into baptismal fonts, the gods into saints or demons, Avalon remained unchanged, unreached, unredeemed. It is the island where magic never had to hide, never had to disguise itself, never had to apologize for its existence. Here the old gods walk openly, though their names have been forgotten in the world beyond the mist. The horned god of the hunt leads his wild chase through forests that remember when all Britain was forest. The triple goddess in her three aspects, maiden, mother, crone, maintains her eternal dance of creation, preservation, and destruction. The spirits of stream and stone, tree and hill, driven from the mainland by iron church bells and muttered exorcisms, here live as they always have, indifferent to the changing fashions of human belief. The magic of Avalon is not the systematized sorcery of medieval grimoires or the ceremonial complexity of Renaissance occultism. It is older, simpler, more fundamental. It is the magic of naming, where to know the true name of something is to have power over it. It is the magic of shape-shifting, where the boundaries between human and animal, between self and other, remain fluid. It is the magic of the spoken word that creates reality rather than describing it, where a blessing or curse has physical weight and measurable consequence. On Avalon, the Christian God is neither denied nor dominant. He is one power among many, acknowledged but not sovereign. This is what makes Avalon so threatening to orthodox medieval Christianity and so necessary to the medieval imagination. It represents the path not taken, the synthesis that might have been, where the new faith and the old ways could coexist without either surrendering its essential nature. The Vale of Avalon. The first attempts to locate Avalon in the mappable world began almost as soon as Geoffrey gave it a name. Human nature cannot bear too much mystery. We need our wonders pinned down like butterflies in a collection, labelled and catalogued, their magic preserved but their wildness ended. If Avalon existed, the reasoning went, it must exist somewhere. If Arthur was historical, his final resting place must be findable. The Welsh had their own opinions. For them, Avalon was Ynys Afallach, the island of Afallach, a name that appears in the earliest Welsh genealogies and poetry. Afallach was sometimes a god, sometimes a king, always associated with the otherworld and its abundance. The name itself might derive from the Welsh afful, meaning apple, or it might be the other way around, the fruit taking its name from the god who governed the otherworld orchards. In Welsh geography, both mythical and physical, islands were not always surrounded by water. A valley surrounded by mountains could be an island. A hill rising from marsh could be an island. Anywhere isolated, set apart, difficult to reach could carry the designation Ynys. This linguistic flexibility opened numerous possibilities for Avalon's location. It could be Bardsey Island off the Lune Peninsula, where 20,000 saints were said to be buried. It could be Lundy Island in the Bristol Channel, isolated and mysterious. It could be any of a dozen other places where the veil between worlds seemed particularly thin. But the most persistent identification, the one that would capture imaginations and transform a small Somerset town into a pilgrimage destination, was with Glastonbury. The argument had a certain logic. In the early medieval period, before the Somerset levels were drained, Glastonbury Tor rose from watery marshland, effectively an island for much of the year. The area had been sacred long before Christianity arrived. The Tor itself, showing signs of ancient trackways and possible labyrinth patterns, the springs at its base revered for their healing properties. More significantly, Glastonbury had apples, the very name, some argued, derived from Ynys Wytrin, the island of glass, which had been conflated with Avalon. The mild Somerset climate, sheltered by surrounding hills, created perfect conditions for apple cultivation. Even today, the area produces some of England's finest cider apples, and in spring the orchards burst into blossom, creating scenes that seem lifted directly from descriptions of the eternal Apple Island. The Christian establishment at Glastonbury, one of the oldest in Britain, had its own reasons for embracing the Avalon connection. The abbey claimed to have been founded by Joseph of Arimathea himself, who brought the Holy Grail to Britain and planted his staff on Weariall Hill, where it took root and became the famous Glastonbury thorn that bloomed at Christmas. If Glastonbury was already the holiest earth in Britain, why not also Arthur's resting place? The marriage of Christian and Arthurian legend would make the abbey the most important pilgrimage site in the British Isles. Glastonbury's claim. In the year 1191, fire consumed the old church at Glastonbury Abbey, leaving the monks with blackened ruins and empty coffers. Reconstruction would require vast sums, far more than the abbey possessed. King Henry II had recently died, ending royal patronage. The monks faced financial ruin. Then, providentially, they remembered an old Welsh bard who had visited the abbey years before, claiming that Arthur lay buried in their cemetery, 16 feet beneath the ground, between two pyramid-shaped pillars. The excavation began with appropriate ceremony. At the depth the bard had indicated, the monk's spade struck something unexpected, a stone slab. Beneath it, carved into the stone, was a leaden cross bearing a Latin inscription, Hic iacet sepultus incletus, Rex Arthuris, in Insula Avalonia. Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur, in the Isle of Avalon. Deeper still, they found a massive oak coffin, containing the bones of an extraordinarily tall man, his skull bearing the marks of numerous wounds, including one great blow that had clearly been fatal. Beside him lay smaller bones, presumably those of Guinevere, with a perfectly preserved tress of golden hair that crumbled to dust when a monk eagerly reached out to touch it. The discovery caused a sensation. Here was proof that Arthur had been real, that he was dead and not sleeping, that Glastonbury was, indeed, Avalon. Pilgrims flocked to the abbey. Donations poured in. The rebuilding accelerated. In 1278, King Edward I and Queen Eleanor attended a magnificent ceremony where the bones were transferred to a black marble tomb before the high altar, positioning Arthur's grave at the spiritual heart of the abbey. Modern historians view the discovery with deep skepticism. The timing was too convenient, the evidence too perfectly aligned with what the monks needed. Gerald of Wales, who visited shortly after the discovery and provided our most detailed account, was credulous even by medieval standards. The leaden cross disappeared during the Reformation, though antiquarians claim to have seen it and provided drawings that showed crude Latin lettering, consistent with 11th or 12th century work, rather than 6th century inscriptions. Yet the question of fraud might be beside the point. The monks of Glastonbury, whether they discovered or created Arthur's grave, were participating in a kind of myth-making that the medieval world understood implicitly. They were giving physical form to spiritual truth, providing a focal point for devotion and national identity. If Arthur needed to be at Glastonbury for Glastonbury to fulfill its role as the sacred heart of Britain, then Arthur would be found there. The bones in the black marble tomb were real bones. The faith of the pilgrims who knelt before them was real faith. The transformation of Glastonbury into Avalon was real transformation. The identification stuck. Even after the Reformation, when the abbey was dissolved and the tomb destroyed, when the bones were scattered and lost, Glastonbury remained Avalon in the popular imagination. The Tor still rises from the surrounding levels, like an island from an ancient sea. The springs still flow with water, tinged red with iron, which imagination transforms to blood. The apple orchards still bloom each spring, and in certain lights, when mist rises from the levels and wraps around the Tor's lower slopes, it is entirely possible to believe that this is indeed the island outside time, the place where the once and future king awaits his moment of return. The Tor rising from the mists, you begin the climb before dawn, when the world exists in gradations of grey, and the mist lies so thick in the levels that Glastonbury Tor truly becomes an island again, rising from a sea of cloud. Your breath comes visible in the cold air, and your footsteps on the grass are muffled, uncertain, as if the earth itself hasn't quite decided to be solid yet. The path spirals around the Tor, and with each turn, you feel yourself moving not just upward, but inward, not just climbing, but performing a ritual whose meaning you sense but cannot articulate. The terraces that ring the Tor are clearly visible. Despite the pre-dawn darkness, their edges too regular to be natural, their pattern too deliberate to be accidental. Archaeologists debate their purpose: agricultural terraces, defensive ramparts, or something else entirely. The most intriguing theory suggests they form a three-dimensional labyrinth, a processional path that mirrors the labyrinths found in medieval cathedrals but predates Christianity by millennia. To walk the terraces properly would take hours, would involve constant doubling back, moving away from the summit in order to approach it. A physical metaphor for the spiritual journey that requires one to lose the way in order to find it. As you climb, the modern world falls away with surprising speed. The town of Glastonbury below disappears into mist. The distant hum of traffic on the M5 fades to nothing. Even time seems to loosen its grip. The Tor has been climbed for at least 5,000 years. Neolithic flints have been found on its slopes, Bronze Age pottery, Iron Age fortifications. Every footstep you take falls where countless others have fallen. Seekers and pilgrims, Druids and Christians, skeptics and believers, all drawn by something they couldn't quite name, but couldn't quite resist. Halfway up, you pause at the spring that emerges from the Tor's flank, one of several that make this hill a natural holy site. The water is cold, startlingly clear, with a taste of earth and iron that connects you immediately to the depths from which it rises. This could be one of the springs that fed the reputation of Avalon as the healing isle. Medieval pilgrims believed these waters could cure everything, from blindness to barrenness. Modern seekers still fill bottles, still claim benefits that science can't quite explain or entirely dismiss. The sun rises as you near the summit, and the transformation is breathtaking. The sea of mist turns gold, then pink, then burns away in wisps and tatters, to reveal the Somerset levels spread out like a map of ancient Britain. You can see why this place has always been sacred. From here, you command views in all directions. On clear days, you can see Wales to the west, the Mendips to the north, the Quantocks to the southwest. This is a place of power, of oversight, of connection between earth and sky, Joseph's Thorn and pagan springs. Glastonbury's claim to sanctity predates its Arthurian associations by centuries. The story goes that Joseph of Arimathea, he who gave his tomb for Christ's burial, travelled to Britain after the crucifixion. Some versions say he brought the young Jesus here years before, during those unrecorded years between his childhood and ministry, a legend that inspired Blake's Jerusalem with its unforgettable line, "And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green?" Joseph, weary from his journey, stopped to rest on Weariall Hill. He thrust his staff into the ground, and it immediately took root, sprouting leaves and blossoms. This became the Glastonbury thorn, a hawthorn that bloomed twice yearly, once in spring like normal hawthorns, and once at Christmas, defying nature to honour Christ's birth. The original was destroyed by Cromwell's soldiers during the Civil War, but cuttings had been taken, and descendants of the holy thorn still grow in Glastonbury, still producing their unseasonable Christmas blooms. Yet beneath this Christian miracle lies a deeper, older sanctity. The Glastonbury zodiac, a contested theory but persistent belief, suggests that the entire landscape around the town forms a massive astrological calendar, with natural and human-made features combining to create representations of the zodiacal signs. The Tor itself sits at the centre, the omphalos, the world navel where all energies converge. At the Tor's base lies Chalice Well, whose waters run red with iron oxide, earning it the folkloric name Blood Spring. The well's cover bears the Vesica Piscis, the ancient symbol of intersection between the material and spiritual worlds. The well predates Christianity by unknown centuries. Its waters never fail, even in the severest drought, maintaining a constant temperature and flow rate that suggests deep sources, connections to underground rivers that run beneath all surface understanding. Nearby flows the White Spring, its calcite-rich waters forming a natural complement to the red waters of Chalice Well. Together, they represent the duality that Glastonbury has always embodied: Christian and pagan, historical and mythical, masculine and feminine, the red and white dragons of British prophecy, the blood and water that flowed from Christ's wound, the menstrual and seminal fluids of generation and regeneration. The landscape itself seems designed to generate mystery. The Tor's unusual geology, a harder capstone of sandstone, protecting softer limestone and clay beneath, creates unusual magnetic fields, documented but not fully explained. People report strange experiences on the Tor: time distortions, mysterious lights, encounters with figures who vanish when approached. Skeptics attribute these to imagination, enhanced by expectation. Believers see them as evidence that the veil between worlds remains thin here, that Avalon still exists, occupying the same space as Glastonbury, but separated by vibrations, dimensions, states of consciousness that occasionally align, allowing glimpses through islands that were and never were. The multiplication of Avalons across the British landscape speaks to a deep need for the sacred island to be both specific and universal, both somewhere and everywhere. Each proposed location carries its own logic, its own claim to be the true resting place of Arthur, the genuine Isle of Apples where magic never died. Bardsey Island, Ynys Enlli, in Welsh, lies 2 miles off the Llyn Peninsula, accessible only in calm weather, often wrapped in mists that make it appear and disappear like a conjurer's trick. 20,000 saints are supposedly buried in its soil, making it so holy that 3 pilgrimages to Bardsey equaled 1 to Rome. The island has apple orchards, ancient ones that produce fruit, unlike any varieties known on the mainland. The Bardsey apple, recently rediscovered and propagated, has flesh that stays white when cut, resisting oxidation, as if time itself moves differently within its cells. The Scilly Isles, 30 miles off Cornwall's coast, offer another possibility. Here, the climate is so mild that tropical plants grow alongside British natives, creating a botanical impossibility that mirrors Avalon's defiance of natural law. Local legend speaks of Lyonesse, the drowned kingdom between Scilly and Cornwall, Arthur's birthplace according to some tales. If Lyonesse sank beneath the waves, might not Avalon be the last remaining fragment, the single island that survived when all else was lost to the hungry sea? Lundy Island in the Bristol Channel was known to the Welsh as Ynys Elen, the island of the Eleni, possibly a reference to the fairy folk who were said to inhabit it. Vikings called it Lundy, Puffin Island, but earlier names hint at deeper mysteries. The island has been continuously inhabited for over 3,000 years, its granite cliffs hiding caves where hermits sought visions and pirates cached treasures. Could not such a place, suspended between Wales and England, between the sacred and profane, be Avalon? Even the Isle of Man stakes its claim, far to the north but central to the Celtic world, equidistant from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. The island maintained its independence long after the surrounding nations were conquered. Its tin-walled parliament, claiming to be the oldest continuous legislative body in the world. Here, Celtic tradition survived unconquered, and the fairy faith persisted into the 20th century. The Isle of Man exists between neither wholly British nor Irish, neither entirely of this world nor the other. The archaeology of myth. Modern archaeology approaches Avalon with tools. Geoffrey of Monmouth could never have imagined ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, carbon dating, DNA analysis. These instruments seek to separate history from legend, fact from fiction, the real Arthur, if he existed, from the mythic king, who grew larger with each retelling. Yet every archaeological discovery seems to complicate rather than clarify, adding layers to the mystery rather than stripping them away. The Somerset levels, where Glastonbury sits, were indeed a watery landscape in the post-Roman period. Core samples show that what is now farmland was then marsh, lake, and river channel. The Romans built causeways to connect islands of higher ground, and these routeways continued in use through the Arthurian period. The discovery of the Sweet Track, a Neolithic wooden walkway dating from 3800 BCE, proves that these wetlands have been sacred, requiring special effort to cross for far longer than Christianity or even the Celtic culture that preceded it. The lake villages of Mere and Glastonbury, dating from the Iron Age, reveal a sophisticated culture that built its homes on artificial islands, crannogs, constructed from timber and clay. These people chose to live surrounded by water, despite the challenges it presented, suggesting that the symbolic value of island dwelling outweighed practical considerations. They were metalworkers of extraordinary skill, producing decorative items that display the swirling, maze-like patterns that would later characterize Celtic art and that some see echoed in the terraces of Glastonbury Tor. Recent excavations at Glastonbury Abbey have revealed evidence of occupation dating back to the late Roman period, supporting claims of great antiquity. Fragments of imported pottery from the Eastern Mediterranean suggest connections to Byzantine Christianity, lending credence to stories of early Christian foundation. But they have found no trace of Arthur's grave, no evidence of the black marble tomb that Edward I supposedly visited, no fragments of the lead cross with its convenient inscription. The Tor itself resists archaeological investigation. Its exposed position means that wind and rain have eroded away most surface evidence. The terraces that seem so obviously artificial might be natural features enhanced by human activity, or entirely human-made structures whose purpose we can only guess. Geophysical surveys hint at buried structures, possibly a metalworking site at the summit, but excavation is limited by the Tor's protected status and the fragility of its ecology. What archaeology cannot find might be as significant as what it can. There is no evidence that Glastonbury was not Avalon, no proof that Arthur didn't come here to be healed. Absence of evidence, as archaeologists reluctantly admit, is not evidence of absence. The mists that roll in from the levels still transform the Tor into an island. The springs still flow with their strangely coloured waters. The apples still bloom in orchards that might be descendants of trees that grew when the world was younger and magic more common. The dream of the Celts, an old druid, stands at the edge of the water, and in his eyes swim visions of a time not yet come. The Romans have been gone for a generation, their stone roads already beginning to crack under the assault of British winters. The Saxons press westward, bringing their angular language and their angular gods, their iron determination to remake this land in their image. The Druid knows his time is ending, that the groves will be cut down, the springs neglected, the old ways forgotten. But he also sees something else, a vision that comes to him as he chews the sacred mushrooms and breathes the smoke of prophetic herbs. He sees a king who will be both British and not British, Christian and not Christian, a bridge between the world that was and the world that will be. This king will gather around him the greatest warriors of the age, but they will fight for ideals rather than plunder, for justice rather than conquest. They will fail, of course. The Druid sees that clearly. The king will fall to treachery, the fellowship will shatter, the dream will die, but in dying, it will achieve immortality. The island he sees in his vision is and is not the island where he stands. It exists in the same place, but in a different layer of reality, like two pieces of parchment laid one atop the other, separate but occupying the same space. On this island, the apples bloom eternally because time itself has been tamed, made servant rather than master. The lady who rules there is and is not the goddess he serves, transformed by the coming centuries, but maintaining her essential nature, the sovereignty that kings must wed, the healing that wounded souls require, the mystery that rational minds can never quite capture. He sees himself, or someone like him, preserved in the amber of story, becoming Merlin, the archetypal wise man, the prophet who enables the king's conception and guides his early reign. His knowledge of herbs becomes magic, his understanding of the stars becomes prophecy, his ability to read the patterns of nature becomes supernatural power. He is diminished and enlarged simultaneously, reduced from complex human to simple archetype, elevated from mortal druid to immortal enchanter. Between the worlds, Avalon functions as the supreme threshold in Western mythology, the place that is neither here nor there, neither wholly in our world, nor completely outside it. It exists in the spaces between certainties, in the pause between breathing in and breathing out, in the moment between sleep and waking, when both dream and reality seem equally valid. This liminality is not a weakness, but its greatest strength, allowing it to be all things to all seekers. For the dying Arthur, it is hospital and hospice simultaneously, the place where healing might occur, but also where a good death can be achieved. The island offers not the crude binary of recovery or demise, but something more complex: transformation, translation from one state of being to another. Arthur doesn't simply heal or die on Avalon. He becomes something other than what he was, something that transcends the simple categories of living and dead. For medieval Christians, Avalon represented the possibility of a paradise that was not quite heaven, but not quite earthly, a place where the blessed might wait for the final judgment in comfort and beauty. It was analogous to, but distinct from purgatory, not a place of punishment and purification, but of rest and restoration. The fact that it was ruled by women, by Morgana and her sisters, added an element of the feminine divine that official Christianity had largely suppressed, but could never entirely eliminate. For the Celts whose traditions Geoffrey drew upon, Avalon was the otherworld, made accessible, if only temporarily, if only to the chosen few. It proved that the old gods had not died when the new god arrived, but had simply withdrawn, waiting, maintaining their power in reserved spaces. The mists that surrounded Avalon were not just physical fog, but the veil between realities, permeable under the right circumstances, at the right times, for the right people. Tennyson's Idyls. By the time Alfred, Lord Tennyson, took up the matter of Arthur in the Victorian age, Avalon had accumulated 7 centuries of additional meaning. The Industrial Revolution was transforming Britain from Arthurian green to industrial grey. The empire stretched across the globe, but at home, faith was weakening under the assault of Darwin and geology. Tennyson's Idyls of the King, published in parts between 1859 and 1885, reimagined Avalon for an age that desperately needed its promise of meaning beyond material progress. His Avalon is aestheticized, romantically vague, more mood than place. In Mortared Arthur, later incorporated into the Idyls as The Passing of Arthur, Tennyson creates perhaps the most beautiful and melancholic version of Arthur's departure. The dying king speaks to the last of his knights. The old order changeth, yielding place to new, and God fulfills himself in many ways, lest one good custom should corrupt the world. This Avalon is not about healing and return, but about graceful endings and necessary transitions. Tennyson's Arthur goes to Avalon not to wait for Britain's hour of greatest need, but to pass away with dignity, making room for new forms of good to emerge. The island becomes a Victorian heaven, all beauty and resignation, where, falls not hail, or rain, or any snow, nor ever wind blows loudly. The Mists of Avalon. In 1982, Marion Zimmer Bradley achieved something remarkable. She retold the Arthurian legend from the perspective of its women, and in doing so, transformed Avalon from destination to protagonist. Her novel, The Mists of Avalon, presents the island as the last stronghold of the mother goddess, defended by priestesses who can part the mists to allow entrance or close them to deny access. This Avalon exists in the same physical space as Glastonbury, but in a different dimension, accessible only to initiates who know how to shift their consciousness to perceive it. Bradley's Morgana. She restores the older spelling is not villain but tragic hero, struggling to preserve the old ways against the encroachment of Christianity, which she sees as patriarchal and life-denying. Avalon represents not just the old religion, but feminine power, ecological wisdom, the holistic worldview that sees all life as sacred and interconnected. The tragedy is not Arthur's death, but Avalon's withdrawal. The closing of the mists that signals humanity's disconnection from the sacred feminine and the natural world. This interpretation resonated powerfully with the modern pagan movement, second-wave feminism, and the environmental movement. Glastonbury experienced a new wave of pilgrims, not seeking the Christian Holy Grail, but the goddess spirituality that Bradley's novel depicted. The town became a centre of alternative spirituality, its shops filling with crystals and goddess figurines, its festivals celebrating the Wheel of the Year, its visitors seeking not the tomb of Arthur, but the living presence of Avalon. Bradley's innovation was to recognise that Avalon had always been about the feminine divine, the necessity of the feminine in any complete spiritual system. Morgana and her sisters were not supporting characters in Arthur's story, but representatives of a power and wisdom that preceded him and would outlast him. The Isle of Apples was the goddess's garden, the place where life was renewed not through heroic action, but through patient tending. The goddess is renewed, not through conquest, but through cultivation. Pilgrims to the tour. You arrive in Glastonbury on a Thursday afternoon in late September. One pilgrim, among thousands who come each year, seeking something they cannot quite name. The high street thrums with a peculiar energy shops, selling crystals and singing bowls beside ordinary bakeries and banks, cafes offering both full English breakfasts and chakra-balancing smoothies. The town wears its contradictions comfortably, a place where Methodist churches and goddess temples coexist, where archaeological museums and fairy shops share the same medieval lanes. You've come for the autumn equinox, though you're not entirely sure why. Something in you responded to images of the tour seen online, to descriptions of sunrise ceremonies and labyrinth walks. You are not religious. Not exactly, but not exactly not religious either. You exist in that growing space between traditional faith and materialist skepticism, seeking something science cannot measure, but your soul insists exists. The Glastonbury you find is simultaneously authentic and performative, ancient and utterly modern. In the abbey ruins, wedding parties pose for photographs against stones that have stood for 900 years. At Chalice Well, a woman fills dozens of small bottles with sacred water to sell in her healing practice in London. On the tour, a group of Druids in white robes prepare for ceremony, while tourists in designer hiking gear stream past, everyone claiming their own version of the sacred. You join a group gathering at the White Spring for a twilight pilgrimage to the tour's summit. Your guide is a woman who moved here from Manchester 20 years ago, drawn by dreams she could never quite remember upon waking. She speaks of ley lines and earth energies with the same matter-of-fact tone someone might use to describe bus routes. To her, the invisible geography of sacred sites is as real and mappable as the visible landscape of roads and buildings. As your group climbs, she points out the terraces, explains the labyrinth theory, shows where Michael and Mary lines supposedly cross at the tower's base. Some in your group nod knowingly, Others maintain polite skepticism, but everyone feels something as the sun sets and the landscape transforms. The electric lights of the 21st century spread out below, but they seem fragile, temporary, easily swept away by the older darkness that remembers when fire was the only light and stories were the only entertainment. At the summit, as twilight deepens into night, boundaries blur. The group that was strangers an hour ago becomes something else. Fellow seekers, temporary tribe, a circle of humanity doing what humans have done here for millennia, ascending to high places to feel closer to something greater than themselves. Someone produces a small drum and begins a simple rhythm. Others hum, not any particular song, but a wordless harmony that seems to rise from the hill itself. You understand suddenly why Glastonbury's modern identity as alternative spiritual capital matters as much as its historical claims to be Avalon. The seeking itself sanctifies the place. Every pilgrim who climbs the Tor, expecting transformation, helps create the possibility of transformation. The Avalon that exists here is not the one Geoffrey of Monmouth invented or that the medieval monks claim to have found, but something continuously created and recreated by those who need it to exist. The apple branch, in the old stories, before boats and barges, before queens and wounds, there was the silver branch. It appeared to those whom the otherworld chose, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in waking visions, sometimes carried by a woman of unearthly beauty who spoke no word, but whose presence communicated everything necessary. The branch bore blossoms of white crystal and apples of gold, and when it moved, it produced music that was not quite music, sound that was not quite sound, a vibration that reached past the ears to resonate in the bones, in the blood, in the spaces between heartbeats. This music had peculiar properties. It could make 9 nights pass as one, or stretch a single moment into centuries. It could heal sorrow so profound that sufferers had stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped acknowledging the world beyond their pain. It could also inflict such longing that those who heard it abandoned everything, family, throne, life itself, to follow where it led. The branch was invitation and compulsion, gift and curse, the golden key that opened doors better left locked. The branch belongs to Manannan Mac Lir in Irish tradition, the sea god who rules the otherworld island of Blach, the place of apples that scholars recognise as cognate with Avalon. He shakes it to summon those he chooses, and its music carries across impossible distances, through stone walls, through time itself. In Welsh tradition, the branch belongs to mysterious women who emerge from lakes and mists, offering it to heroes who have grown weary of the world's weight. Those who accept the branch, who follow its music, find themselves in landscapes where ordinary physics cease to apply. Colours exist that have no names, being neither combinations of known hues nor entirely new, but rather the true forms of which earthly colours are pale shadows. The air tastes of honey and salt water simultaneously. Every breath fills the lungs with something more than oxygen, something that makes the blood sing and the mind expand beyond its usual boundaries. What archaeology cannot find, the tools of modern archaeology, precise, methodical, rigorously empirical, are magnificent for uncovering certain kinds of truth. They can date pottery shards to within decades, trace trade routes through molecular analysis of metal objects, reconstruct diets from microscopic residues on cooking vessels. They can tell us how people lived, what they ate, where they travelled, how they died. But Avalon exists in the spaces between potsherds, in the silences between the data points, in the realm that scientific methodology was specifically designed to exclude. Archaeology cannot find the moment when a story becomes true through the telling. It cannot carbon date faith or perform spectrographic analysis on hope. It cannot excavate the dreams of medieval monks who saw visions of an island where death had no dominion, cannot measure the longing of Victorian poets who needed beauty to survive in an age of factories and coal smoke. cannot quantify the spiritual hunger that drives modern seekers to climb the Tor at sunrise. This is not a failure of archaeology, but a recognition of its proper boundaries. Science excels at answering how and when and what, but stumbles at why and grows mute at what does it mean. Avalon is built entirely from meaning, constructed from the human need for sacred space, for the possibility of healing, for the promise that death is transformation rather than ending. These are not things that leave physical traces in the archaeological record. Consider what archaeology has found at Glastonbury: evidence of continuous sacred use for at least 5,000 years, from the Neolithic through to the present. But it cannot tell us what made the place sacred, what quality of light or land or spirit caused our ancestors to recognize this particular hill as holy. It can document the structures they built, but not the experiences they had within them. It can map the pilgrimage routes, but not the transformations that occurred along them. The absence of Avalon in the archaeological record might be its truest validation. A physical Avalon, pinned down to specific GPS coordinates, with a visitor centre and guided tours, would cease to be Avalon. It would become another historical site, interesting but inert, significant but no longer sacred. Avalon's power lies precisely in its ability to exist between categories, between history and legend, between place and no place, between the Britain that was and the Britain that dreams itself to be. Even if archaeologists found Arthur's bones, proved beyond doubt his historicity, established exactly when and where and how he lived and died, Avalon would remain untouched. Because Avalon was never about the historical Arthur, but about the archetypal Arthur, the once and future king who represents humanity's highest aspirations and most necessary failures. Avalon is where that Arthur goes, has always gone, and is always going, not a place in the past, but a permanent possibility in the eternal present. The mists that surround Avalon are not water vapour that can be analysed for their chemical composition. They are the mists of consciousness itself, the clouding that occurs when rational thought reaches its limits and other ways of knowing become necessary. Every attempt to dispel these mists with the bright lights of scientific inquiry only causes them to thicken, to shift, to reform in new configurations. Avalon retreats before investigation, exactly as far as investigation advances, maintaining always the same sacred distance, the same necessary mystery, sovereignty, and the sacred feminine. She rises from the lake at dawn, and she is simultaneously young maiden and ancient crone, simultaneously the land itself and its guardian, simultaneously Morgan and Nimue, and every woman who has ever stood between the human world and the great mystery. Water streams from her hair, like silver threads connecting heaven and earth. In her hands, she holds not Excalibur, but something older, a cup, a cauldron, a grail that predates the Christian overlay, the vessel of regeneration from which all life emerges, and to which it returns. This is sovereignty, the principle that Celtic kings had to wed to rule legitimately. Not sovereignty in the modern sense of political authority, but something deeper, the living spirit of the land that chooses its human representatives and withdraws its blessing when they prove unworthy. Arthur's wound at Camlan is not just physical trauma, but the breaking of this sacred marriage, the rupture between king and kingdom, between human ambition and natural law. On Avalon, sovereignty reveals her true nature. She is not the prize kings win through conquest, but the power that permits kingship to exist. She is not passive, but supremely active, not conquered, but choosing to yield, not possessed, but offering temporary partnership to those who approach with proper reverence. The healing Arthur receives on Avalon is not just the binding of wounds, but the restoration of right relationship with the feminine principle he had lost touch with in his pursuit of masculine ideals of honour and glory. Morgan embodies this sovereignty in all its complexity. She opposes Arthur, not from malice but from necessity, testing whether he deserves the power he wields. Every obstacle she places in his path is an invitation to grow beyond his limitations. Her theft of Excalibur's scabbard, the part that prevents the loss of blood, the feminine container that makes the masculine blade effective, is not treachery, but teaching. Without the scabbard, the sword becomes mere violence. Without the feminine, the masculine becomes mere destruction. The Round Table itself was a feminine gift, coming to Arthur through his marriage to Guinevere, the dowry from her father. It is circular, womb-like, creating space in its centre, privileging no position above another, except by merit. When the Round Table breaks, it is because the knights have forgotten this feminine wisdom, have begun competing for precedence, for glory, for the hollow honours that masculine competition creates when it loses touch with feminine wholeness. Avalon is where this balance can be restored, where the wounded masculine can remember its partnership with the feminine, where the sword can be reunited with its scabbard, where sovereignty can heal what ambition has broken. The Western Paradise. The West has always been the direction of paradise in the mythologies of Atlantic Europe. It is where the sun goes to die each evening and where it is reborn each dawn, making it the natural home of mysteries of death and regeneration. Beyond the western horizon lies the great ocean that has no farther shore, the boundary between the known world and whatever lies beyond knowing. Avalon is one of many western islands that promise escape from mortality's limitations, each offering its own variation on the theme of earthly paradise. In Irish tradition, there is Tir na Nog, the land of youth, where Oisin spent 300 years that seemed like 3 days. Loving Niamh of the golden hair. There is Magmel, the plain of delight, where heroes feast eternally on food that satisfies without satiating. There is High Brazil, the phantom island that appears once every 7 years, solid enough to land on, but impossible to find when sought deliberately. The Welsh have their own western paradises. Beyond the 9th wave lies Gwales, where the head of Bran the Blessed spoke prophecy and entertainment for 80 years, while his companions felt neither hunger nor age. There is Caer Sidi, the revolving castle where poets are initiated into the deepest mysteries, and from which Arthur and his companions attempted to steal the cauldron of rebirth, returning with only 7 survivors from the expedition. All these islands share certain characteristics that mark them as variants of the same archetype. Time moves differently there, usually slower, though sometimes faster, but never at the same rate as the mortal world. Death is unknown, or at least postponed indefinitely. Food appears without cultivation, buildings stand without construction, music plays without musicians. Sorrow cannot take root in such soil, and even memory of pain fades like morning mist. Yet every story of these western paradises includes the same warning. They are not for permanent residents. Mortals who visit must eventually return or pay a terrible price. Oisin, stepping off his horse onto Irish soil, instantly aged 300 years and crumbled to dust. Bran's companions, once they remembered their homeland, could no longer bear the perfect pleasure of their feast. The Western paradise is meant to be glimpsed, not grasped, to inspire rather than imprison. Dreams of return. The promise of Arthur's return is not a simple messianic prophecy, but something more complex, more psychologically sophisticated than medieval Christianity's vision of Christ's second coming. Arthur will return when Britain's need is greatest, but this need is never precisely defined, allowing each generation to project its own crises onto the prophesied moment. Is it military invasion that will summon him? Social collapse? Spiritual crisis? Environmental catastrophe? The ambiguity is purposeful, essential, ensuring the promise remains eternally relevant, eternally deferred. During the Welsh resistance against English domination, bards sang of Arthur sleeping in caves throughout Wales, waiting with his knights for the horn call that would summon them to drive out the invaders. Shepherds and miners reported finding these caves, by accident, always by accident, never when sought glimpsing armoured figures around a great round table before the entrance sealed itself, never to be found again. The caves multiply across the landscape. Craigie Dinas in the Glamorgan Valley, Alderley Edge in Cheshire, the Eildon Hills in Scotland. Arthur sleeps everywhere and nowhere, as omnipresent and invisible as hope itself. The Tudors claimed Arthurian descent to legitimise their seizure of the English throne. Henry VII named his first son Arthur, declaring the prophecy fulfilled. The once and future king returned in this prince, who would unite Britain and inaugurate a new golden age. When Prince Arthur died at 15, the dream transferred to his younger brother, Henry VIII, who displayed the Round Table at Winchester, commissioned Arthurian pageants, presented himself as the returned king, even as he dissolved the monasteries that had preserved Arthurian legend through the Dark Ages. The pattern repeats through British history. Elizabeth I was the returned Arthur in female form, the Virgin Queen whose round table was the world itself. The Stuarts claimed Arthur to justify uniting the Scottish and English crowns. During the English Civil War, both royalists and parliamentarians invoked Arthur for their cause. In the darkest days of the Second World War, when invasion seemed imminent, there were those who watched the English Channel, half expecting to see a barge emerging from the mist, bearing the king who would save Britain in its darkest hour. But Arthur never quite returns, or rather, he returns only partially, temporarily, in leaders who embody some aspect of his legend without fully incarnating it. Churchill was Arthur in his ability to unite Britain against existential threat, but the Round Table of Empire dissolved almost immediately after victory. The welfare state was Camelot's ideal of the strong, protecting the weak, but it too proved temporary, subject to erosion, betrayal, the entropy that affects all human institutions. Perhaps this is Arthur's true gift, not to return, but to make us believe in the possibility of return. Every hero who fails honourably, every ideal that falls short magnificently, every dream that dies beautifully becomes part of the Arthurian legend, adding another layer to the palimpsest. Arthur's wound heals so slowly on Avalon because it is constantly renewed by fresh failures, fresh betrayals, fresh evidence that humans cannot sustain the perfection they can imagine. Yet the dream persists, must persist, because without it, we become something less than human. The promise of Arthur's return is the promise that our failures are not final, that our ideals matter even when we cannot live up to them, that somewhere, in a place we cannot reach but know exists, healing continues for all the wounds the world inflicts and we inflict upon ourselves. The modern mysteries. In video games and virtual reality experiences, Avalon proliferates into infinite variations, each one interactive, explorable, responsive to the desires of the user. Players quest for the island through digital mists, solve puzzles to part the veil between worlds, earn the right to enter through accumulated experience points and completed missions. These electronic Avalons offer something the medieval imagination could not: the ability to actually visit, to walk among the apple trees, to speak with Morgan, to witness Arthur's healing, or participate in it. Contemporary fantasy literature has generated hundreds of new Avalons. Urban fantasy places the island in parallel dimensions, accessible from modern cities, through hidden portals in subway stations and abandoned buildings. Science fiction reimagines it as an alien world, a generation ship, a quantum probability where different physical laws apply. Each iteration adds to the legend, while claiming to reveal its true nature, the reality behind the myth. Netflix series and Hollywood blockbusters give Avalon CGI splendor, making visible what was always most powerful when invisible. The mists become digital effects. The apple trees glow with post-production enhancement. Morgan's magic manifests as particle effects and color-graded energy. These visualizations satisfy the modern hunger to see everything, to make concrete what was abstract, yet something is always lost in the translation from imagination to image. Social media has created new forms of pilgrimage to sites associated with Avalon. Instagram posts from Glastonbury tour at sunrise generate millions of views, each photograph attempting to capture the uncapturable, to share the unshareable. The hashtag Avalon connects seekers worldwide, creating virtual communities of believers who may never meet physically, but who share a digital space where the mythical island exists as collective construction. The eternal autumn. The light in Avalon's orchards is always golden, always slanted, always the light of late afternoon in early October, when the world pauses between growth and dormancy, between summer's excess and winter's austerity. This is the light that makes everything it touches seem more real than real, that transforms ordinary objects into symbols, that reveals the eternal significance hiding within temporal forms. The apple trees stand in perpetual harvest, their fruit neither fully ripe nor beginning to decay, but suspended at the perfect moment of readiness, when the wind moves through their branches, and there is always a gentle wind in Avalon, never still air, never violent gale. The leaves whisper secrets in languages that predate human speech, yet speak directly to human consciousness. Some who have claimed to visit Avalon in dreams or visions report that they understood this whisper perfectly while present, but could remember no words upon waking, only the feeling of having known something essential. The grass between the trees is soft as moss, studded with flowers that bloom regardless of season, spring violets alongside autumn asters, summer roses with winter hellebore, butterflies that should have died with the first frost dance, with snowflakes that never quite reach the ground. Everything exists simultaneously, all seasons present in each moment, time not frozen but folded, pleated like silk, all of its extent, accessible from any point. This eternal autumn is not stasis but perfect balance, the moment when forces of growth and decay achieve equilibrium. It is the pause between breathing in and breathing out extended indefinitely. It is the satisfaction that comes not from consuming but from contemplating, not from possessing but from perceiving. In Avalon's eternal autumn, desire is neither denied nor indulged, but transformed into appreciation, want into wonder, need into acceptance. When all the mists have cleared, if they ever truly clear, what remains is not the island itself, but the space it created in human consciousness for the sacred, the mysterious, the possible. Avalon's greatest gift was never healing for one wounded king, but the promise of healing for every wounded soul. Its apple orchards feed not physical hunger, but the deeper appetite for meaning, for beauty, for something beyond the mechanical operations of material existence. The question of whether Avalon ever existed is ultimately the wrong question, like asking whether mathematics exists or whether love exists. Avalon exists in the way that all the most important things exist, not as objects in space, but as relationships between consciousness and cosmos, as patterns that organize experience, as bridges between what is and what might be. Every time someone climbs Glastonbury tour seeking transformation, Avalon exists. Every time a storyteller begins, once upon a time, Avalon exists. Every time someone refuses to accept that death is final, that healing is impossible, that the age of wonders has passed, Avalon exists. We need our mysteries. We need places we cannot reach, islands we cannot find, promises that are never quite fulfilled. Without them, the world becomes merely what it appears to be matter in motion, briefly animated by chemical processes, signifying nothing beyond its own temporary arrangements. Avalon saves us from this poverty of imagination, this starvation of soul. It insists that there is more, has always been more, will always be more. The mists that surround Avalon are not obstacles to understanding, but protections for mystery, preserving the sacred from the corrosive effects of certainty. They part not for the strong, but for the wounded. Not for the proud, but for the broken. Not for those who would conquer, but for those who need healing. And perhaps this is Avalon's deepest teaching, that we must be wounded to be healed, must be lost to be found, must release our grip on the world we know to discover the world that waits beyond the mist. And so we come to the end of our journey through the mists. Though with Avalon, every ending is also a beginning, every farewell a promise of return. We have walked through orchards where golden apples grow heavier with meaning than any fruit that nourishes the body. We have stood at the shore where barges arrive, carrying broken heroes who might yet be healed if they can learn to release their attachment to the wounds that define them. We have climbed the spiral paths where earth reaches toward heaven, and heaven bends to kiss the earth. Avalon remains what it has always been, the island that exists everywhere and nowhere, the place you cannot reach by sailing west, but might find by journeying inward, the homeland of the soul that recognizes no maps, acknowledges no borders, answers to no authority, but mystery itself. It is the eternal reminder that the world is deeper, stranger, more magnificent than our philosophies can compass, that every attempt to explain away wonder only causes wonder to relocate, to reconstitute, to emerge elsewhere, in forms we haven't learned to recognize. In an age that has mapped every island, photographed every square meter of Earth from space, catalogued and categorized and commodified every mystery it could find, Avalon persists in its glorious impossibility. It cannot be found on Google Earth, cannot be reached by GPS navigation, cannot be conquered by technology or explained by science. It exists in the last free space human imagination, where it reigns supreme, sovereign, inviolate. Perhaps Arthur heals slowly on Avalon, not because his wounds are so grievous, but because he heals at exactly the pace we need him to heal, returning precisely as much as we can bear of what he represents. Too much nobility, too much honour, too much commitment to impossible ideals would break us as surely as their absence diminishes us. So he remains suspended in Avalon's eternal autumn, not dead, not fully alive, but something more useful possible. I'm grateful you've accompanied me through these historical landscapes tonight. Sleep peacefully, wandering through history's quiet gardens.